Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to have our first guest on with us tonight from my FEMA Region 5, in the beautiful heart of the Midwest, FEMA's Midwest. We're going to be talking for the next about 30 minutes about weather modification, weather anomalies, just the craziness going on in the world. And we're joined by Michael Janich. He is a independent journalist who covers weather anomalies, geological events on his YouTube channel, Dutchsinse. He also has a website, Dutchsinse.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Janich, Dutchsinse, is with us. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the program tonight.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Can you guys hear me all right?
Oh, yeah, that Skype audio sounds fantastic. How's it sound over there, Freebirds? Is it good? Sounds good. And thanks again for coming on, Mike. First and foremost, for those who are unfamiliar with your work, just quickly, just a brief introduction about who you are and why you decided to make videos on YouTube about the weather and geological events.
Sure. And thank you for having me on. It's an honor to be on Kokesh's show. Really cool to see you guys all getting together and doing that on the East Coast. Congratulations and good luck.
Thank you.
It's been a real crazy journey for me, guys. I started out, first of all, my background is in computer programming, I just got a major feedback, specifically hardware systems design. And long story short, I ended up dropping out of college and went into the telecom industry, where I worked on cell phone towers. I worked in the switch and back systems. And then from that, I made a series of discoveries around 2010 having to do with radar and weather modification. And that's kind of what lofted me onto YouTube and to get my name out there. So I'm known for this radar discovery. I've paid attention to the weather my whole life, been interested in it. Also earthquakes, geology, seismology, anything having to do with earth changes I've been interested in for a long time, as most people are. I mean, most people are very interested in these topics in general because they affect all of us. And so a series of serendipitous events led me into the radar discovery, which then fully thrust me into weather mod. And that's where I started to learn about cloud seeding, what everybody calls chemtrails. We should stop calling it chemtrails, by the way, guys. Start calling it by the proper terminology, which is cloud seeding. And intentional and unintentional cloud seeding, sometimes there's airplanes that fly over that have dirty jet fuel. The dirty jet fuel lingers and forms into clouds, as opposed to deliberately going up there and spraying something with a nozzle, which they do as well. So that in itself is something we could talk about for 2 to 3 days. And then there's the whole frequency aspect to what they do with the clouds once they're formed. They're not just going to spray the cloud and let it float away. The whole intent is to spray a cloud and then control the cloud once it's in the air. And so what we've found over the series of the past 2 years now is a series of patents and processes that the government, National Weather Service, U.S. military, foreign governments take part in behind the scenes. It's kind of hush-hush, but we're finding more and more information about it. It was denied for the longest time, just like chemtrails were denied. And now we come to find out there's huge plans underway now, and plans that have been taking place for the last 20, 30 years to accent aquifer supplies, give water to crops in certain areas, even to make it rain for, let's say, the Olympics. So that's kind of what led me into all this, and of course now we could go into specific aspects on that. But that's my overall story, guys. That's how I got here.
And that's incredible too. What you just mentioned about first off, making it rain in the Olympics. That is true. Corporate media, mainstream outlets have covered that as well. The 2008 Olympic Games in Beijing, China. But you brought up a great point. I mentioned this briefly at the start of the show, and that's calling this by its proper terminology. I think it's very key and crucial if we want to for you, the listening audience, to want to uncover this subject through government documents or university white papers. It's very crucial to know the proper terminology, because you can go from being labeled a conspiracy theorist to actually having a conversation with these type of people in just a matter of seconds by knowing the proper terminology. And you brought up a great point with cloud seeding. Everyone calls it chemtrails in the movement. It is cloud seeding. And if you can easily just go to startpage.com and type in cloud seeding PDF, I mean, you're going to find ample amounts of documents on cloud seeding from all over the country. What other proper terminology should the audience be aware of if they want to pursue investigating the issue of geoengineering weather modification?
A very good place to start for most people, I'd say, would be to look up cloud condensation nuclei, and that's CCN. It's an abbreviation, an acronym. And if you look up CCN, you'll find out that going back even to the 1940s, even earlier, that scientists found that the use of certain substances, certain aerosols in the air, have certain effects in the atmosphere. One substance that we've all heard about, silver iodide, it's a yellowish powdery substance. They found that when they spray it into the atmosphere, it causes a molecule of water to condensate onto that small particle of silver iodide. And then that gets blown up by the natural currents in the upper atmosphere, and it then condenses more and has a chain of molecules develop upon it, and we get a raindrop, or you get a small cloud forming. And the more silver iodide that's applied, the more molecules that form, the bigger the clouds, and so on and so on. And what they've also found is that there's other substances that will mitigate a storm, that will stop it. So one of the substances, carbon black, okay? There are some people that will report dark chemtrails from time to time. They don't use it all the time, but carbon black, it's the same thing that's put into a laser printer. You know that black powder that in a laser printer? Okay, we're talking the same thing. A carbon black factory just blew up on the East Coast a few months ago that they didn't even talk about, but it was a huge explosion, and they're making this stuff for spray into the air, and that's just two substances, silver iodide, carbon black. There's so many. They use kerosene, they've used propane, they've used dry ice. So, there's a huge program that's run by a company called Weather Modification Incorporated, and it's a company that you can hire, and they're located out of North Dakota. I think many people might already know about them. But what they do is you can hire them. Aquifer authorities, for instance, will hire this company to come and spray via aircraft clouds to make it rain. And now they don't control it with radar. Okay, that's a whole other aspect that the Air Force and Defense Department owning the weather 2025, that's a whole other thing we can go into. But in general, you can hire a company right now to make it rain for your crops. That's just one thing that's going on right now that's verified. It's true.
And that's something that they actually have like outward on their website, if I remember correctly. I think I've actually been to their website, and they actually say right there, advertised, black and silver, we offer geoengineering services.
Yeah, Charlie, bring that up so the audience watching at home or who are watching this on YouTube can see for themselves about Weather Modification Incorporated. And I mean, there's so many companies out there throughout the country who are promoting it. It's Weather Modification Incorporated.
Weather Modification Incorporated?
Yeah, just it's weathermodinc, I believe, .com.
Is this a video you want me to pull up?
Yeah, it's a website.
Website, yeah.
Any questions from the chat for our guest, Mike?
Now everyone's kind of just discussing the idea of chemtrails right now.
Now, I do have a question. Now, we do know is our American Air Force has poisoned our sky with aluminum, boron, and toxin, as well as other things. How do we stop this? Do we force our elected officials to pass legislation to make this illegal? How do we stop the massive spraying in the air of chemicals?
It's a really good question. There are certain avenues to take. Law is one, okay? If you make it illegal to do it, then that will at least offer some criminal penalties for it. Right now, it's being encouraged, okay? They're having huge symposiums. National Weather Service is talking about. There's darker reasons behind why they're saying we need to do it. It's not just global warming. The newest thing that they're trying to say is that there's a huge amount of methane that's getting ready to be released from the Arctic ice. This is called the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, and it's sponsored by multiple scientists, multiple consortium of agencies, and they're talking about the need to have a global chemtrail. I mean, they're not calling it chemtrail. I call it a chemtrail campaign to spray over the Arctic in order to induce a large amount of snow to keep this methane that's in a huge bubble below the Arctic, 50 gigatons worth of methane. I mean, we're talking a huge amount. And they're literally going live in March 2013 with this plan, whether or not the governments are all on board or not. And so how do we get them to stop? We have to pass laws internationally. Of course, the UN isn't going to work. So each country is going to have to ban the practice of aerosol spraying and then enforce it. And unfortunately, what we found out is that there's scientists, I call them mad scientists, dude, because what they're doing is they're going off the west, like for instance, off the West Coast this past year, a guy went out and dumped something like 1 million tons of iron oxide into the ocean as a geoengineering experiment. And he did it out in international waters. They arrested him and then had to let him go because he didn't technically break any laws.
Wow. So we have a question from our chat from Josh Lee. I'm guessing he's coming from the point of being a skeptic. He says, how much do we actually know about them using aluminum?
Because there are GMO seeds that is resistant to pesticides as well as aluminum. So if they're making these seeds that's resistant to these type of chemicals, they might be putting in the air. I hate to sound like conspiracists, but it's things that they have done repeatedly over and over again. Which brings me to my next topic. Do you think it's all about them wanting to control the food supply, so only their food that is genetically modified can resist these poisons?
Well, before you answer that, first, if you could answer the question from the chat on Josh Lee's point about the aluminum.
This is something that if you guys are at a computer now, it's really easy to go look up. There's several meteorologists that show chemtrails on radar, okay? And there's an example from Seattle and another one from Florida, for sure. One of them, I think, was in Why in the World Are They Spraying? And it's a weatherman that's sitting there talking about the chaff that they release, okay? And it's aluminum strips that are like a gel. They're like jelly-like. And he waves one around, okay? And it's about 4 inches long, and it's designed to, when it comes out of the airplane, to break up into small pieces and basically go into a powder. And that's the aluminum chaff. Now, one of the uses for quote-unquote chemtrails, or cloud seeding, if you want to call it that, either way, the military talks about using it to obscure their stations from radar view from enemy satellite or enemy plane. A perfect example is happening right now on live radar, guys. If you want to go look it up, go on. You can go look up College of DuPage or any radar system and go look at southern Florida right now at Key West. And what you're going to see is, if you go compare, I put it up on my Facebook just because it blew me away that this was happening today, is that over southern Florida, over the Key West Naval Air Station, no less, there's a huge amount of chemtrail activity showing on radar, or cloud seeding activity showing on radar. But if you go look at actual visible satellite for the area, it's pretty much a clear day. There's a couple little clouds, but nothing like what you're seeing on radar. So what they're doing is they're spraying some kind of invisible substance that you can't see to the human eye, but if you look at it with radar, you're not going to see what's there going on at the Key West Naval Air Station.
Hey, Dutch, could you send that link quickly on Skype to our producer, Charlie, so we can show it to the audience right now about what's going on in Key West, Florida? Any questions from the...
Actually, no, that's what I was going to ask.
Okay.
What was that link?
Now, on your YouTube channel at Dutchsinse, youtube.com/Dutchsinse, you have ample amount of videos in which you go over the College of DuPage website. You go over in real time what you see from radar, and you make a prediction, and more likely than not, your prediction turns out to be correct on a potential storm taking place in any particular region. Quickly go over various websites you have gone to that those in the listening audience may want to look up and trying to spot weather modification for themselves in real time on radar.
Sure, and the process is simple, folks. You look for things that don't look natural. So if you start seeing straight lines or curved circles or squares that appear in the clouds, okay, this is not just an artifact you're actually looking at something that's happening and being represented on the screen mathematically. The computer is picking it up in the radar stream, and it's literally representing it to you on a screen through an algorithm. So whatever you're seeing, it actually is taking place out there. Whether it's actual physical or not is another thing, because you can see electronic signatures using radar. That's how they view HARP, for instance. Most people don't know this. They think that HARP is viewed through an ionosonde or an ionogram. Well, it's not. It's actually viewed through radar. They use radar to look at the ionosphere and determine what's happening at these different interactions of heat. Now, this is all about heat transfer and the creating of what we were talking about earlier called CCN, okay, cloud condensation nuclei. There's 100 different ways to make it. Nature makes it through dust blowing up into the upper atmosphere. Water molecules cling to that dust and form a raindrop. Okay. It also happens with volcanoes. When a volcano erupts, you hear about a volcano erupting, the huge ash cloud goes up, and then it rains muddy rain down on everyone. Or when a nuclear bomb explodes, same thing. Those huge raindrops that form after a nuclear bomb explodes, that's CCN. Those small particles go up. Well, what they've found is that CCN can also be caused through electricity, kind of like a Tesla effect. Using an electrical current, they can make a frequency. Different frequencies have different effects. And one frequency, for instance, here's just one example out of thousands, guys. 13.56 megahertz will destroy methane gas. So if we sat in a room with a transmitter and we're able to project and target 13.56 megahertz at a chamber of methane gas, it will turn that methane gas into a solid. Okay, and it happens virtually instantly. We're talking temperatures that supposedly, according to the director of HARP, for instance, 5,000 Kelvin, which is insanely hot. We're talking about plasma hot temperatures. But in order to get those temperatures, you have to be able to target the frequency very, very finely with high-tech instruments and good antennas. So, so basically, what I've found, and other people have seen as well, is that radar itself is capable of producing this electronic CCN generation. They've already done the experiments down in Texas. They hooked up a generator to a series of wires. These are doctors and PhDs that did the experiments, folks. And a company called Ionogenics, you guys can look this up, Ionogenics, did the ion experiments. They generated literally small ions in the air using a current projected via wire. So you could basically call it a satellite dish. And what they found is that indeed clouds were formed, storms were formed using frequency alone. No aerosol sprayed whatsoever. Wow. It's like a clean chemtrail. Wow. Well, unfortunately, the side effect to doing that is a resonance. And what we see is 2 to 3 days after you see one of these pulses occur, it unfortunately usually makes a severe weather event, not just a rainstorm.
Amazing.
And yeah, that's the discovery.
We're currently showing on the screen, for those watching live or watching this on YouTube, we have on screen the NexRad site currently in Melbourne, Florida, close to Key West. But what we're seeing live are, we're seeing this NexRad, Dutch. Could you explain to the audience just what it is we're seeing? And the audience may see some like a long flash in this video. Just explain quickly what it is we're seeing and how it's depicted on radar.
Sure, no problem. I'm looking at, for instance, if you're on the College of DuPage, I'm looking at the 1km view. Now, you can also click in and look at the actual NexRad feed for each location. To view this, what I'm talking about the best, you need to go to the 1km feed and then click on the Bahamas, because that'll give you the best view of southern Florida. And what you'll see are these long, wavy, on radar, you will see these long, wavy clouds. And they're covering the entire southern Florida peninsula. They started earlier today and spread out from the Naval Air Station, starting north, and blew over the entire Naval Air Station. Well, if you go look at on the same 1km feed, you can switch between radar and visible. So you click on the same visible feed for the same time frame, and you'll see over Key West, crystal clear. And so what that means, or maybe a couple puffy clouds, but nothing looking like what you're seeing on radar. So what you're seeing something on radar that isn't there to your naked eye. What is it? Well, it turns out those are in the same shape and they're distributed out via airplane. You can see them be laid by the airplanes. Literally today, we watched it happen, myself and 100 other people on Facebook. We're forwarding the links back and forth saying, hey, are you seeing what's going on in Southern Florida? And there it is. And so that's what made me go look at the visibles feed and say, hey, well, if this is happening on a radar, what is going on there in real life? And it turns out that's your aluminum chaff.
Explain
Okay.
explain the aluminum chaff.
The aluminum chaff, again, if you guys go over to YouTube, you can look up these meteorologists who, during their nightly broadcast, they got calls all day long from people at the station asking, what is this giant storm coming towards us? It looks clear outside. And the meteorologist is forced to get up there in Florida and also in Seattle, where these naval air stations are and submarine bases that they're trying to hide on radar. And he says, okay, this is not a storm that's coming toward, I'm paraphrasing here. He says, okay, this is not a storm that's coming towards us. This is actually chaff. And then he pulls out the thing and he waves it around. It's about 4 or 5 inches long and looks, rubbery, and he's waving it back and forth. And he says this is a aluminum product that the military sprays, or that the military drops out of aircraft, and it turns into a powder. Now, then the other meteorologist on the other coast, this is at 2 different time frames over a course of 2 or 3 years, gives the explanation. He goes, okay, these are not actual storms that are coming towards us, folks. Don't worry, we don't have any big snowstorm coming. What that is military chaff. He goes, you're going to have to trust me on this. I was in the Marines. Wow. This is the weatherman on local NBC nightly news. Okay.
Mike.
Gotcha. I've got one last question from the chat from Liberty Scholar, who says, I've seen a lot of studies that state modern airplanes simply have more efficient engines, which leave prolonged contrails in the sky. What does the guest say to these studies?
I say that's extremely accurate, and you need to look up what the Arctic Methane Emergency Group is proposing. They're proposing using regular jet aircraft for the FAA to divert the aircraft to different spots where they need clouds built at no cost to themselves. And what they've figured out is that jet fuel is the more dirty the jet fuel, and they even talk about doping the jet fuel, meaning load it up with something. But they're talking about the use of common air traffic to build clouds, because it's been observed over the last 50
hold on.
years.
Dutch, now we've got the actual video in Key West, so the audience can see what is going on. Oh man, we're running short on time with you, but holy smokes! I mean, that's just
That is so much different than like mid Florida that we were looking at.
right.
That's pretty wild. That's so cool that we could just check that out now, like.
Public information, people.
Weather.cod,
Knowledge is power.
weather.cod.edu. What other sites quickly?
You got that link?
I've got on my YouTube page on Dutchsinse, just go over there, and I've got 4 links on there. One says weather monitoring links, one says earthquake, one says radiation. You can click on those, and I've put together just as many links as I can find and that I use myself and that other people use, and just start using them, guys. This all happens real time, and they censor it half the time. I'm not joking. You will see something, and then you will see it go black, and you'll say, oh, and if you don't get a screenshot of it, no one believes you. And make sure when you get a screenshot to get that timestamp in there, because otherwise they accuse you of photoshopping and faking it. And unless you provide that link and provide that picture, people won't believe you when you tell them, man, you wouldn't believe what happened over Southern Florida today.
And that's why I'm a big fan of your work, is because you do the videos in real time, you timestamp it, you do the screenshots, and you put it on your website, Dutchsinse.com, and you actually show the evidence. So we're looking at Key West right now, so we can have this on record, and maybe we can get you back on Monday when Daryl hosts the show. I know he's going to be talking a lot about geoengineering and GMOs. What cities are going to be impacted the most within the next 24, 72 hours with what we're seeing in the radar in Key West?
Well, as for Key West, this is military activity. I don't see severe weather off of the aluminum cloud seeding that we're seeing here. That's to hide something that they're doing there, which is intriguing in itself. If somebody lives down there, you might want to go down to the station and just park out there. But Actually, I didn't say that, right? So, overall, the United States right now needs to watch. We saw several heart ring pulses, what I call heart rings, radar pulses, out of southern Florida or northern Florida, southern Alabama. And that was a day ago. So we're watching for tornadoes to hit southern Alabama today. And that's basically what we have going on right now. We had hail, damaging winds, strong cell thunderstorms, and they blew up and blew right into the area that pulsed yesterday. And that was documented by other people on YouTube. You can just type it up for yesterday and you'll see their videos. And they were expecting it and we were expecting it. Now, they do that because the storm is coming. They're trying to guide that storm, pull it magnetically using the pulse. And, of course, that creates CCN, like I was just talking about, which is positively or negatively charged, depending on what they want to do.
Wow. So look out for Alabama then?
Right. Look out for Alabama. We still have another 24 to 48 hours to go on the pulse that happened yesterday. Because usually I give it 72 hours from the time that I see the pulse till the time that I say, okay, everything's okay. Because literally, and that's due to a series of discoveries that we made having to do with the resonance effect that happens. There's it's called a Fourier heat dissipation is what actually occurs. But when that happens, the electromagnetic charge bounces between the North Pole and the South Pole for days at the speed of light. It just goes back and forth, and it has what's called a conjugate point. Its corresponding point on the South Pole. And so everything on Earth has its own conjugate point. You have your own conjugate point, however weak it is, on the other side of the planet. And so anything that has a charge to it has a corresponding pole. And so what they've found is that the frequency bounces back and forth, and they can release that energy that's bouncing back and forth over a 3-day period or all at once. And all at once can make something like an earthquake happen, for instance.
Michael Janich, thank you so much for coming on. That half hour flew by fast. And next time I get a chance to get a co-host on the show, definitely have you on. And we're going to be working on a documentary together. So hopefully people can look out for some good work in the next few months or so.
How do you plug
Thank
yourself up?
you for having me on, guys.
Thank you so much. Go to Dutchsinse.com. Follow him on Twitter at Dutchsinse. Facebook.com/Dutchsinse is YouTube videos. YouTube.com/Dutchsinse. Thank you so much for coming on the program.